for the BBC Diamond Jubilee, I had to read in St Paul's. So I'm walking down the aisle behind the Archbishop of Canterbury, standing in front of my lectern. The Queen is like a yard in front of me, so is Prince Philip, and there are rows and rows and rows of famous faces from my childhood. Wow, wow. So it was pretty nerve-wracking, that. And then I had to read this great chunk from the Bible. It seemed to get longer and longer the more I looked at it. It's being broadcast around the world. You're in the epicenter, you're in London, you're in St Paul's Cathedral, you've got the royal family in front of you, and every word is echoing around the building. Oh my goodness. But somehow I got through it.
Amos Madra.
Hello and a warm welcome. I'm joined by a special guest, Mike Reed, broadcaster for over 40 years and author of the books 1,000 Years of a London Street. And there's a second part to it now, 1,000 Years of a London Street, Cheapside, by Mike Reed. Mike, a warm welcome to you. As a radio personality, it is like being in a fairy tale right now. This is amazing for me. Welcome.
Oh, being in a fairy tale with an evil goblin. Yeah, that's me. Amos, pleasure. That's a great pleasure. Yeah.
It's great to have you here, Mike. And, it's interesting. Someone who's been in broadcasting, radio, what made you want to start writing books?
Well, I've always written. This is my 41st book, I think. So, yeah, we initially did the Guinness books. Tim Rice, Paul Gambaccini, and myself did all the Guinness Book of Hit Singles. Then I was asked to do other books. I was asked to write the autobiography of the Shadows. Then I was asked to do one on Cliff, and then I did a couple of my poetry books, and so it went. And I've got books out there now on blue plaques, because I'm chairman of the British Plaque Trust. We put the blue plaques on the walls. History of Rupert Brooke, the First World War poet. So many different things, poetry, all kinds of books. And then when we did a blue plaque on Denmark Street, which is Tin Pan Alley, which is where all the publishers and songwriters used to be, where Bowie and Elton John and people first started, we did the blue plaque, and I'd written about 20,000 words on the street. And somebody said, well, why don't you put it out as a book? And I thought, well, yeah, I could go further back. And I went back 1,000 years. We did the book 2 years ago. And then I said to the publisher, look, I'll do a little series of 6,000 Years of a London Street, and this is the second. Cheapside's a bit bigger and a bit longer and a bit older than Denmark Street, but it's been fun to do.
And talk to us about Cheapside and the whole process in putting it all together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long process going through each door in the street, especially as down the centuries, numbers change and houses change, and they've had so many fires there in the city, obviously, because all the buildings are made of wood. They have fires in the 600s, the 900s, the 1000s. 1212 was known as the Great Fire of London until 1666, when they had yet another Great Fire of London. So you can imagine things being built and rebuilt and all the rest of it. And then the numbering system didn't come until later. So it's quite a job. And of course, in 1666, with the Great Fire of London, again, it's all razed to the ground. They're all wooden buildings. And the City of London said, unless you claim your plot and rebuild, like within a year, I think it was, you forfeit it to the city. So everyone's like rushing around. Well, where was my bit? You can imagine it's all leveled and it's just a pile of ashes. People are trying to find, because it's not like now, street lamps. Oh, I was 2 down from that lamp. It's just a bit of a wilderness. So people are trying to find where their site was and rebuild a bit of property with a bit of wood. So the city didn't, so many little alleyways and snickets. And people said, well, it's this great glass city of London. How come these tiny alleyways? And it's because people wanted to rebuild quickly. They didn't want to wait for it to be, reconstructed. Christopher Wren wanted to do big boulevards. And people, no, hang on, we don't want to lose our plot of land. So they all rushed and...
So, Mike, thank you for explaining that for us. Now, the book, obviously, is going to be reaching a new audience as well. What's the message that you want the reader to take? What is it that the audience, especially a younger one, who might be just coming into this sort of information, what would you like for them to take?
Yeah, well, it's accessible history, and you try and make it fun. I mean, you and I know at school, if there's anything dry and dusty and boring, you kind of switch off and go, yeah, okay, okay. It's often the style in which it's written. Again, as we know, much like a teacher, if you've got a teacher that's enthusiastic and tells you in the right way, you sort of think, oh, yeah, I like that. But if it's someone that's just droning on and dry and dusty, you tend to switch off a bit. So, yeah, I try and keep it interesting. So the first half of the book is, an overall history of 1,000 years or more. And the second part are the numbers. So it's number one, number two, number three. Those have changed over the years. Of course, they didn't start numbering them until much later. But basically, that's it. You're going through each door back in time and back in time. And I mean, there are so many fascinating things there. I mean, all the royal processions took place there. There were murderers there. There were hangings there. They had the Eleanor Cross there for about 4 centuries. It was a meeting place for everyone. It was a big thoroughfare. I mean, now it's more city, it's more corporate. Now a lot of people are probably more inclined to go, Cheapside, where is that exactly? It runs, east directly from St. Paul's. But back in the day, as Charles Dickens Jr. said, it was the most important street in London. It was heaving. In like 9, 10, 1100s, there'd be market stalls everywhere, people selling goods, fish, bread. It would be a sort of heaving, weaving mass of people back in the day, and all kinds of people. One bloke turned up, claiming he was Jesus with his disciples, and some people are thinking, well, maybe, who knows? Maybe you better go along with him because you don't know. And they bunged him in the tower, and he said, "Oh, why?" He said, "Yeah, I'll be saved." And then I think they hanged him, and he said, "It's all right. No, no, I'll be saved. Don't worry." And he wasn't. People like that, like the first railway murder, um, a guy called Franz Muller came to pawn all the stuff he'd stolen in the street, and they found out who he was. Amazing bit of detection. You think back in the day, and somebody thought he'd caught a boat to America. So the police and the witness, the cabbie, and everybody all got on a faster boat from Liverpool and were waiting for him when he got to America. And then they thought they couldn't get extradition because it was still, the Civil War was still going on. It was 1864. So they had to write to Abraham Lincoln and say, would you mind if we took this murderer back to England with us? So, all sorts of things that now, if the police in Manchester had somebody, they wouldn't be allowed to just hop on a boat and go to New York and come back and charge expenses. It wouldn't work like that. And also, another guy that murdered on a train, Percy Mapleton, he was the first person to be caught by identikit because he was described and they drew a picture of him and put posters out there. First time they'd ever done that, and they caught him. And when he went to court, he said, "Do you mind if I wear evening dress because it might impress the jury and they might let me off?" Which of course they didn't. So he went absolutely immaculately dressed in evening dress. So the street's certainly full of characters over the years.
It sounds fascinating, and I can imagine people must have been talking to you about getting this turned into a film or TV series. Is that something you'd ever consider?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. One of the problems there is it's a bit linear. That to try and turn it into a film, you wouldn't have people that were present all the way through. So you couldn't have a hero or a love interest because it's going from generation to generation to generation. So it's like the only thing you could do is have some, guiding omnipresent voice, the voice of Mr. Cheapside or something talking through it. So you could there are certainly parts of it that are definitely interesting. I mean, when you think of the Great Fire and the plague and things like that, where people are terrified, and people, when the plague hit London, they moved a few miles away thinking they'd be all right, and of course it hit the rest of the country. So those things were terrible. To be walking the streets and see houses boarded up and piles of bodies on tumbrils and things like that must be terrifying for people. Watching their kids die of the plague, and then later, of course, cholera. And nobody knew quite what it was. They thought it was airborne, and then John Snow discovered it was in the water. Okay, so all these things that people discover as you go along, and the fire, when they started rebuilding, they said, well, let's not build of wood because it burns very easily. So so the great history. Of course, the Romans were there. They had an amphitheater there. and baths and the lot. So yeah, it was. And the first time I was talking about all the fires they had, I mean, Boadicea or Boudica, as we call it now, came along with the Iceni and sacked London and burnt it to the ground. So it has a history of being burnt to the ground.
Yeah. Again, you talk about these histories, and we remember studying them in school, but you go into detail with them. Talk to us about collating the information and making sense of it, and then writing it for the audience to make sense of.
Sorry, say it again. You broke up a little bit, Amos.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, I say, with these stories, you really delve into it. You go into the fine details with it, and these are stories we've heard before, but not in the way that you describe it. It's so fascinating. So I was just asking, how do you collate this information together? Of course, it's out there in the public, but then you go into the finer details with it. How do you bring it all together? How do you make sense of it? And then how do you put this out there for the audience to understand?
I think it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. But you've got all the pieces, and you go, okay, I've got all the pieces. I'm going to put them all together and make it make sense, and also make an interesting story of it. You can always relate facts, but I think a story is certainly more interesting. I mean, like we all know the story, maybe through Panto of Dick Whittington. But what people don't know is the charity he set up is still very wealthy today and still benefiting people in 2023. And people go, Dick Whittington, he was made up, wasn't he, a Panto character? But no, he was real. He was Lord Mayor of London, and he was Lord Mayor of Calais as well. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting facts, and I think it was him that set up this sort of the loos. He had about 24 toilets on a long line, all next to each other for the public. So the first sort of public toilets and things like that. So yeah, there's some fascinating characters walk the streets. And when Henry VIII was a lad, when nobody really knew he was, he'd put on some old clothes and go down to Cheapside and watch some of the fun and some of the things going on down there. So yeah, it was full of characters. And Shakespeare, of course, was down there. Thomas à Becket was born there. So there's some fascinating characters over the years. And of course, a Cockney, Amos, is someone born within the sound of Bow Bells. Now, that's not Bow, the place, it's Mary le Bow, which is the church right in the center of Cheapside. And if you're born within the sound of the bells of Mary le Bow, you're technically a Cockney. So, of course, these days, there aren't so many Cockneys because the buildings are so high that the bells don't go very far. But back in the day, you could hear them right across Hackney Marshes, up to Highgate, where Dick Whittington allegedly heard them. See, so you could be a Cockney born way, way out there. And there was a period, I think, 1856 to 58. One of the neighbors complained about the noise of the bells. She couldn't sleep. So there was silence for 2 years. So technically, there were no Cockneys born in those years because the world couldn't sound of the bells because there were no bells ringing. So there's some fun little stories like that as well.
That's brilliant. I love that one. That's one to share in the future. So,
Yeah.
when you speak about these stories, they're so interesting. Are there any that particularly stand out for you that might have pulled your heartstrings emotionally and maybe brought a tear to your eye?
Well, some that are certainly strange. I mean, I guess you can't get too involved. I mean, John Hancock was over here for 2 years, a wealthy boy from a wealthy family, and he was for appeasement between America and Britain because things were building up to, a sort of boiling point, really. And he said, no, we don't want, I'm for the king. And eventually he was the first signatory of the American independence, the Declaration of Independence. So he was part of that. But he was here saying, no, we don't really want to secede from England. But they did. They became a colony. And sometimes things surprise you. I was at a dinner party and the veteran DJ and presenter Pete Murray was there. And somebody was talking about this and I was researching it. And Pete said, did you mention Cheapside? I said, he said, oh, I lived there when I was a lad. I said, did you? He said, yeah, my parents had a pub in Cheapside. I said, really? So I sat down and talked to him, and he said, yeah, the old music hall, the big music hall artist at the time in the 30s was a guy called Jack Buchanan. He said, my mother used to dance on stage with him, and he wanted her to be his leading lady. But my father put his foot down in the days when fathers did put their foot down and could. Now they're more likely to say, "Excuse me, I'll do what I like, thank you." Anyway, he lived there, and then years later, in the early 50s, there was a soccer magazine started there by a guy called Rich Carter, who was an England and Sunderland player, and called Soccer Star. It was the first dedicated soccer magazine in the country. And this young schoolboy, who became David Hamilton, the broadcaster, used to send in columns for it. So he used to write for it. They'd never met him, but they sent him the money, he sent him more columns. When he left school, he went up to get a full-time job, and they said, "You're a schoolboy. We thought you were a grown man." He said, "No." So when he was a teenager, he was sending in these columns for Soccer Star. And one of the people that wrote to him about his collection of football programs was a young lad from Limerick called Terence Wogan. Now, here's the thing. David Hamilton is writing for Soccer Star.
Wow.
Another lad, Terry Wogan, writes in to David about his collection. And a few doors along, Pete Murray used to live. And the three of them all ended up working together on Radio 2. Now, what about that for 6 degrees of separation?
My goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the radio. I mean, obviously you were doing breakfast, BBC Radio 1.
Yeah.
That must have been something. Talk to us about that experience.
It was good. When I was at Luxembourg, I got the job on Luxembourg out of about 2,000 people. Somebody said, send a tape, and I was too busy. And they said, well, come up to London, do a live audition. So I did. And they said, but we got about 2,000 tapes to listen to, we'll let you know. And I thought, well, that's that. I got a call the following day, and 2 weeks later, I found myself living in Luxembourg, which I hadn't even anticipated. Then in about 10 months, I got a call from Radio 1, went over to see Dorian Davis, head of music, sent me to Derek Chinnery, and who was the controller. And they phoned my agent, and Derek said, does Mike want this job? And he said, oh, yes, I think he'd love it. And he said, well, it must have independent means. He gave the sort of impression that, this sort of, well, not terribly bothered about it. He said, no, that's his way. He said, he is. He said, most people come in here crawling over broken glass to get a job. And he was rather diffident about it. Anyway, I got it. And then I started doing the breakfast show, which I did for 5.5 years. And it is, as you know, Amos, it is a bit of luck that you're at the front of the queue when the door opens and you think, there's nobody in front of me. I could have been second or third or fifth in line and saying, I was nearly there, the door opened and I was nearly there. But you've got to be able to do it, I think, once you get in, like any job. You've got to have the luck to get in, but then you've got to do the job. I've seen people go in and sort of disappear again in a short while or fall by the wayside. You've got to not only get in, I think you've got to fit into the team. I remember I had a music Dorian Davis saying to me, she said, well, it's not just about playing records and playing music and knowledge of that. She said, you're an ambassador for the BBC. So you'll be out there. And she was right. I mean, pretty soon I was doing a thing in front of 10,000 people and the Queen and Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace. Then I was at the Guildhall with Diana. So, yeah, you were a BBC ambassador. So you were out there virtually wearing the badge. So there was more in those days to just playing records. For the BBC Diamond Jubilee, I had to read in St. Paul's. So I'm walking down the aisle behind the Archbishop of Canterbury, standing in front of my lectern. The Queen is like a yard in front of me, so is Prince Philip. And there are rows and rows and rows of famous faces from my childhood. Wow. So it was pretty nerve-wracking, that. And then I had to read this great chunk from the Bible. It seemed to get longer and longer the more I looked at it. It's being broadcast around the world. You're in the epicenter, you're in London, you're in St. Paul's Cathedral, you've got the royal family in front of you, and every word is echoing around the building. Oh my goodness. But somehow I got through it.
Wow, absolutely amazing. I mean, that is the stuff that it's easy when you're watching it on TV, but you don't think about what the person's actually going through when they're in that situation and having to face all these people that we all look up to. The Queen is there, the Duke is there, the Archbishop, and all these celebrities, and rows upon rows. And yeah, just amazing stuff. So the radio show again. Sorry, I keep going back to it. you know, how in terms of like you said, it was more than the music, and that's very much what radio is, and Radio One really sets the path for all these other different radio stations, which tend to then follow because it became very much personality radio, and you were the one starting this whole new concept. How did that go in terms of building content and then just to pioneer the way forward? How did it go with
Yeah.
producers and the top brass?
Well, we were a really good team, actually. I mean, I just thought, Amos, I was having a good time. But it turns out I learned stuff as well while I was there. And we had a gathering the other day. And what is lovely is we're the only gang of people from that radio and the whole era and what have you. We still get together. So I was sitting next to my old producer from Radio One and our PA, our secretaries there as well, Smiley Miley from the Roadshow, Bob Harris, a whole gang of us. And I said, and our old boss, Johnny Beerling, I said, isn't it great? I said, we all actually enjoy getting together and having a gathering, which is really lovely. I mean, you could have a collection of individuals who went, oh, I don't fancy that. Oh, I don't want to see so and so again. But we're all there and we all had a good time. And it was great fun. I mean, it really was. The road shows were great fun. I love being out on the road, doing the weeks on the road. And again, they were so popular. I remember I did a thing for the playing fields at Buckingham Palace with the Duke of Edinburgh, and he came over and he said, which road show are you doing this year? I said, I'm doing the West Country, sir. And he said, what stunts you got lined up this year? And I said, well, I got a few up my sleeve. So I mean, it was that well known, the road show. I mean, it
Oh
was
yes,
used to
yes,
have 25,000 people watching a radio show.
yeah.
Watching a radio show. It was extraordinary, but terrific fun. It really was.
Of course, we all remember the road shows, and as you said, it was terrific fun, and the presenters just had they were just having the time of their lives. Where do you see radio now and going into the future as well? Where do you think things will be?
Well, I think there are too many radio stations because they can't. Well, they're not sustainable. Really, people can't get money in. People talk about sponsorship or advertising, but it's very, very difficult. I think the big boys have rather carved everything up. If they'd done what they did in Germany and maybe had initially the IBA, when they were the Independent Broadcasting Authority, should have said, all right, we'll have a big commercial station for the Southeast, one for the Wessex area, one for the Southwest, East Midlands, West Midlands, Wales, and they got them into big sustainable areas. I think that would be good, but they're also small and local now. Some are very good, but it's difficult to sustain them financially. So people are doing it for nothing. So a lot of people put their hand up and go, yeah, I'll do it for nothing. But if you do it for nothing, you sort of take anybody, but in any walk of life, if you were running a factory or a business, you're manufacturing something, and people said, oh, I'll do it for nothing, you think, yeah, but what standard is their work if they're doing it for nothing? And you can't actually say, I'd like you to do this, because someone said, well, sorry, mate, I'm doing it for nothing. So it's a very strange one, radio at the moment. There are so many radio stations, so much choice, that I often say to people, why would somebody listen to your station as opposed to 200 others? Because you can get anything anywhere in the world now. It's not just a local station anymore. You could pick up, your station, my station, anything anywhere in the world if you wanted to. So there's often no money behind them for marketing, promotion, and if you're not paying people, then they're going to sort of kind of do what they want in a way.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. And it becomes a passion, something that you do want to do. As from a presenter perspective, it is difficult for stations, of course, sustainability, and then of course the standards. It just becomes really, really difficult. And there is, as you said, so many radio stations that are out there now. But yeah, you stood out, Radio Luxembourg. How did they find you? The BBC radio team.
Oh, BBC. Well, I'd done a program for Seven Up, I think it was, and they'd heard this program and called me over to London, and I thought, oh, great. And in fact, a couple of weeks before, I'd been to the opening night of Evita, and sat at the same table was the controller of Radio One, Derek Chinnery. And somebody said, "Go on, chat to him, chat to him." And I said, well, you know, you're probably the same. You don't like to be pushy, you be friendly and chat, but I couldn't be pushy. So I sort of smiled, exchanged a few words. At the end of the evening, we all stood up and were saying goodbye. And Derek smiled his sort of rather wry grin. He shook my hand. He said, "Nice to meet you, Mike. No doubt we'll meet again soon." I started reading something into that. No doubt we'll meet again soon. What did he mean? Did he? I was joining Radio One, and I was sort of rolling around. What did he mean? We meet again soon. Ooh, but it happened. Whether he had something in his head at the time or not, I don't know. But it was great. And it's funny the reasons you get in. The reason I started in local radio, there's a station run by a guy I knew, Neil for French Blake with 2 small F's, and Charles Duro, who was now the Duke of Wellington. They were running a station, and Neil said to me, I said, "Neil, I'm not a broadcaster. I play guitar, I sing, and I left college. That's what I do that with writing." And he said, "No," he said, "you'll be great on the radio." I said, "Don't you want to hear me?" He said, "No, I don't need to. You'll be fine." I said, "Well, why do you want me on your station?" He said, "3 reasons." He said, "1, you're very English. 2, you're mildly eccentric. And 3, you're a bloody good opening bowler." And I said, "What's that got to do with it?" He said, "I'm starting a cricket team and you're opening the bowling." I said, "I already play for a team." He said, "You play for me now as well." So he was an interesting character. Even when after I joined Radio Luxembourg, Steve Wright and myself were both on that. We did the Read and Write show together. And we still felt and still do, even though Neil's not with us anymore, that he was our boss. He was still our boss one way or another. And he phoned me from different parts of the world. "Hey, Michael, it's Neil." I said, "Hello, Neil, how are you?" He said, "I can't tell you, and I can't tell you where I am. But if anything happens to me," I go, "Well, what's going to happen to you?" And I get these strange calls, once a year. He said, "You're one of the only people I really trust." He said, "But if anything happens to me, you keep saying, what's going to happen to you?" And then he came out at his funeral. I was asked to read by his wife. And afterwards I said, "Who's those 2 men in Max and Trilby's?" She said, "I don't know, MI5, MI6? I said, that might explain a lot. Since then, it's come out. I don't know what he was doing, but he was doing something around the world. He was setting up, radio stations in war-torn areas, and he was doing stuff with MI5, MI6. So he'd phone me and say, "I can't tell you where I am, but if anything happens to me," So yeah, he was up to all sorts of spying missions, I think.
Oh, fascinating, fascinating. And, again, you are somebody who just is a storyteller, from radio to the writing the books. And again, life is about stories. This is how we learn. This is how we live. It's through the stories that we hear and we tell. And this book is going to be, again, just such a thrill for so many people to read. Is it available now to purchase from all good bookshops?
And some bad ones as well. I think it comes out on the 25th of July. Yeah, on the 20th. The 1,000 Years of Denmark Street is already out there, and 1,000 Years of Cheapside is out on the 25th of July. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your company today. It's been just such an honor speaking to you. And again, I hope we will meet again soon.
Definitely, Amos. Thank you very much. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks. If you want some amazing inspiration, check out the videos next to me, and I'll see you right there.